All right, imagine this. Um, you've got two powerful countries squaring off. Thousands of troops, warships, cannons, all on the verge of war.
Sounds intense.
And the cause of all this
Well,
tension?
I'm on the edge of my seat. What was it?
A pig.
A pig. You're kidding, right?
Nope, not kidding at all. Welcome to our deep dive into the unbelievable story of the pig war.
The pig war. Okay, that definitely piques my curiosity. It sounds more like a children's story than a historical event.
I know, right? But trust me, this is a real historical event, and as strange as it sounds, it almost led to a war between the U.S. and Great Britain.
Okay, I'm all ears. Set the stage for us. Where and when did this pig war take place?
We're talking 1859, and the setting is San Juan Island, this beautiful but remote island off the coast of what is now Washington State.
Ah, the Pacific Northwest. Beautiful country, but pretty wild back then.
Absolutely, still very much a frontier, and the ownership of San Juan Island was, well, a bit murky.
Murky how?
So you see, after the Treaty of Oregon in 1846, which basically drew a line between the U.S. and British Canada.
Right, settling the Oregon boundary dispute, if I remember correctly.
Exactly. But this treaty, while it settled a lot, it kind of left the San Juan Islands hanging.
Meaning?
The treaty said the boundary line would go through the Strait of Juan de Fuca, but it didn't specifically say who got the islands within the strait.
Ah, I see. So both the U.S. and Britain could claim them. A recipe for conflict, for sure.
You got it. And to make things even more complicated, both countries had people living on San Juan Island.
Who was there first?
Well, the British, specifically the Hudson's Bay Company, had set up a sheep farm on the island back in 1853.
The Hudson's Bay Company. Weren't they big in the fur trade?
Yeah, they were, but they were diversifying. This sheep farm was actually pretty successful. They had good grazing land, and the wool was in demand.
So the British had their stake. What about the Americans?
Well, around the same time, you had American settlers start to trickle in. Opportunity, of course. The U.S. government was encouraging westward expansion. There were things like the Donation Land Claim Act, offering free land to folks willing to settle and farm it.
Free land, huh? I can see why that would be tempting.
And that's where our main character in the story comes in, an American farmer named Lyman Cutler.
Okay, Lyman Cutler, what's his story?
Well, he arrived on San Juan Island in 1859, ready to claim his piece of the American dream.
Sounds straightforward enough. What's the pig got to do with all this?
Well, hold on. We're getting there. Cutler built his cabin and planted a potato patch right near the British sheep farm.
Uh-oh, I sense trouble brewing already.
Yeah, you could say that. You've got these American settlers eager to claim their land, often right next to established British operations. Not exactly a recipe for harmonious relations, right?
Definitely not. So we've got British and American settlers all wanting a piece of the same island. Tension's already simmering. It sounds like this pig incident was just waiting to happen.
It really was. And to understand just how explosive this pig incident became, we need to dig into the personalities involved and the events leading up to that fateful day.
All right, let's dig in. Tell me more about this pig situation.
Well, it all started with the pig. It belonged to Charles Griffin, the manager of the British sheep farm.
Okay, so British pig, American farmer. Go on.
Now, this wasn't just any pig, mind you. According to Griffin, it was a prize breeder.
Yeah.
Valuable, you know. And one day, this pig, it wanders onto Cutler's property, right into his potato patch.
Uh-oh. A pig in a potato patch. Sounds like trouble.
Trouble indeed. Cutler sees this pig rooting around his potatoes, and, well, he doesn't hesitate.
He chases it off.
Nope, he shoots it dead.
Whoa, talk about an overreaction. I mean, I know a pig in your garden is annoying, but shooting it, that seems a bit extreme.
You and me both. But Cutler, well, he was a man of action and maybe a little quick on the trigger.
So I'm guessing this didn't go over well with the pig's owner.
You think? Griffin was furious, demanding Cutler pay him $100 for the pig. A lot of money back then.
Yeah, I bet. So what did Cutler do? Cough up the cash?
Not a chance. Cutler was, well, let's just say he was a proud man, stubborn too. He refused to pay. He even told Griffin, better chance for lightning to strike you than for you to get $100 for that hog.
Oh boy, that's not going to de-escalate things. Talk about pouring gasoline on a fire.
Exactly. What started as a simple property dispute, pig in the potato patch, suddenly became a much bigger issue. You've got national pride, simmering resentment from past conflicts, and two stubborn individuals refusing to back down.
A recipe for disaster, it seems. So how did this local dispute between a farmer and a farm manager turn into something that could have sparked a war between two nations?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Enter Brigadier General William S. Harney, a U.S. Army officer known for, shall we say, his enthusiastic personality, and a strong dislike for the British.
Uh-oh, this doesn't sound good. What did this General Harney have to do with the pig?
He was visiting the area when he heard about Cutler's complaints. Saw the American flag flying over Cutler's cabin and, well, let's just say he decided to take action without even consulting his superiors.
It's action. What kind of action?
He ordered U.S. troops to San Juan Island.
Wait, he sent in the army because of a pig?
Well, he claimed it was to protect American settlers. But yeah, essentially, he turned a local dispute into a potential international crisis.
Wow, talk about escalation. So who did he send to San Juan Island? Some random soldier?
It's not exactly. The troops sent to San Juan Island were led by Captain George Pickett. The very same George Pickett who would later become famous or infamous for Pickett's charge at Gettysburg during the Civil War.
Wow, so Pickett was involved in this pig war too. History is full of strange connections, isn't it?
It really is. And Pickett's presence on San Juan Island definitely added fuel to the fire. He was, a staunch defender of American interests, wasn't afraid of confrontation. He set up camp right next to the British sheep farm, posted notices claiming U.S. jurisdiction over the island. Basically, he poked the bear, so to speak.
Oh boy, I can imagine how the British felt about that. What happened next? Did they just back down?
You'll have to wait for part 2 of this deep dive to find out.
Back down? Oh, not a chance. The British, they weren't about to let this slide. They were pretty ticked off, to say the least.
I can imagine. So what did they do? Send a strongly worded letter.
A letter? Oh no, this was much more than a strong worded letter. This was gunboat diplomacy in action. The British governor in Vancouver, James Douglas, he dispatched 3 warships to San Juan Island, along with a whole bunch of Royal Marines.
Whoa, 3 warships. That escalated quickly.
Yeah, you could say that. It was a pretty clear message. Don't mess with us or with our sheep, for that matter.
So you've got American soldiers facing British warships all over a pig. It sounds like something out of a comic opera or something.
It does, doesn't it? But you got to remember, this was a time when national pride was a powerful force. And the San Juan Islands, well, they were seen as strategically important. Both countries wanted control of that territory.
What was the reaction back in Washington, D.C. and London? Were people freaking out?
Well, here's the thing. News traveled a lot slower back then. It took weeks for the news of this standoff to reach the capitals. Imagine President Buchanan's surprise when he finally hears about it. His country's on the verge of war with Great Britain, and all because of a pig.
I bet there were some frantic telegrams flying back and forth trying to figure out what to do.
You bet. Both governments realized the situation had gotten way out of hand. Nobody actually wanted a war over a pig. But things were very tense. You had all these troops and warships in close proximity. It could easily spark a real conflict.
So who stepped in to cool things down? Was it some high-level diplomat?
Well, Buchanan knew he needed someone who could handle the situation carefully, someone who could keep a cool head and maybe even rein in General Harney, who, let's face it, wasn't exactly known for his diplomacy.
So who was the man for the job?
Buchanan chose General Winfield Scott, a seasoned diplomat, war hero, and someone known for his ability to, well, smooth things over.
Winfield Scott. Okay, he's a name I recognize.
Yeah.
Wasn't he involved in the Mexican-American War?
That's right. He was a highly respected military leader and a skilled negotiator. He seemed like the perfect person to defuse this powder keg.
But getting him out to San Juan Island in 1859, that couldn't have been easy.
You're telling me no airplanes back then? It took Scott 6 weeks by sea to get to the Pacific Northwest. And that involved a pretty grueling trek across the Isthmus of Panama. Remember, no Panama Canal at this point.
Wow, 6 weeks. Talk about a commitment to diplomacy.
It really shows how seriously they were taking this situation. They knew they had to get someone in there who could prevent things from spiraling out of control.
So Scott finally arrives on the scene. What were his first moves? Did he just yell at everyone to stand down?
Scott, he was more strategic than that. He knew he had to de-escalate the situation carefully. So first, he ordered most of the U.S. troops to leave the island. Just kept one company there.
That was a pretty big gesture, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Showing he was willing to compromise.
Exactly. And then he met with Governor Douglas, talked things over, you know, and he actually managed to persuade Douglas to withdraw the British warships, too. Just left one ship behind as a symbol of their presence.
Wow, that's impressive. Scott really knew how to play the diplomatic game.
He did. And his efforts really helped to ease tensions on the island. It was a major step toward finding a more lasting solution to this whole mess. But, of course, the underlying issue, who actually owned the island, that still hadn't been resolved.
Right, so they averted war, but the fundamental question was still hanging in the air. How did they deal with that? Flip a coin? Draw straws.
They could, but they went with a more, let's say, civilized approach. They agreed to a joint military occupation of the island.
A joint occupation. Meaning,
Basically, they split the island in two American troops on one side, British troops on the other.
so they were basically forced to live as, well, not exactly neighbors, but...
Co-occupants, frenemies, something like that. And you know what? It actually worked. For the most part, the joint occupation was relatively peaceful.
Really? No more pig-related incidents?
A few minor disagreements here and there, sure, but nothing that threatened to spark another war. It was a pretty remarkable example of, finding a way to coexist despite their differences.
For 12 years, they shared the island.
Yep, 12 years. And get this, there are stories of the soldiers from both sides actually becoming, well, not quite friends, but...
Friendly.
Yeah, friendly. They held competitions, celebrated holidays together. It's kind of heartwarming, isn't it? Even in the midst of this territorial dispute, they found ways to connect on a human level.
It's a good reminder that even when countries are at odds, the people involved can still find common ground. It's a shame politicians can't always do the same.
Ain't that the truth? But while things were relatively calm on San Juan Island, a much bigger conflict was brewing back east. A conflict that would have a profound impact on the United States and ultimately on the fate of the island itself.
You're talking about the Civil War, right?
Exactly. The Civil War changed everything. It shifted priorities, drained resources, and forced both sides in the pig war to rethink their positions.
So how did this war, fought thousands of miles away, affect this little island off the coast of Washington?
Yeah, the Civil War, it really threw a wrench into things.
I can imagine. Resources stretched thin, priorities shifting. How did it directly impact the situation on San Juan Island?
Well, the U.S. Army, they needed troops back east to fight the Confederates, so they started recalling units from the West Coast.
Including those stationed on San Juan Island.
Yep. The small contingent of U.S. troops there, they were basically left in limbo. Short on supplies, even had trouble getting paid on time.
Must have been a strange feeling. Peaceful standoff on one side of the country, while a full-blown war rages on the other.
Absolutely a strange situation.
And speaking of strange situations, remember Captain Pickett?
Oh yeah, the guy who later led Pickett's charge at Gettysburg. What happened to him during all of this?
Well, Pickett, he was a Virginian, and when the Civil War broke out, his loyalties were torn.
I bet. Tough choice. He ultimately decided to side with his home state, resigned his commission in the U.S. Army, traveled back east, and joined the Confederate forces.
So from a peaceful standoff on a remote island to one of the bloodiest battles of the Civil War, what a story.
History's full of twists and turns, isn't it?
It really is. But back to San Juan Island. Did it just stay in this state of suspended animation, British and American troops awkwardly sharing space while the Civil War raged on?
Well, the Civil War definitely delayed a final resolution. But in 1871, after the war ended, the U.S. and Great Britain signed the Treaty of Washington. This treaty addressed several issues between the two countries, and one of those issues was, you guessed it, the ownership of San Juan Island.
So after more than a decade of uncertainty and almost going to war over a pig, the fate of San Juan Island came down to, what, another standoff?
Thankfully, no. This time they opted for a more peaceful approach. International arbitration.
International arbitration. Sounds fancy. How does that work?
They basically chose a neutral third party to decide, and in this case they chose Kaiser Wilhelm I of Germany.
Wow. The Kaiser of Germany. That's a pretty big deal.
It was the fate of this little island resting on the shoulders of a European monarch.
So, what was the Kaiser's verdict? Who got the island?
Drum roll, please. The Kaiser ruled in favor of the United States.
So after all that, San Juan Island became American territory.
That's right. The British troops packed up, left the island, and the pig war, well, it finally came to an end.
It's amazing, isn't it? A dispute that started with a single shot, fired at a pig, could lead to a major war, involved years of military posturing, and ultimately was settled by a German Kaiser.
It really highlights how even seemingly small events can have huge consequences, and it underscores the importance of, well, not overreacting, I guess. Shooting a pig. Probably not the best way to handle a neighborhood dispute.
Definitely not. And it makes you think about the potential for misunderstanding and conflicts in our own time. What seemingly small issues, what pigs, so to speak, could escalate into something much bigger if we're not careful.
That's a question worth pondering. We may have instant communication these days, but misunderstanding and miscommunication can still happen, sometimes with serious consequences.
Absolutely. We can learn a lot from the pig war. It's a reminder that clear communication, diplomacy, and a willingness to find peaceful solutions are crucial, even when things get tense.
Couldn't agree more. And sometimes it takes looking back at these seemingly absurd events in history to remind us of those essential truths.
Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into the pig war. A story of pigs, potatoes, national pride, and the surprising twists and turns of history.
And a reminder that even in the most unlikely of situations, diplomacy can prevail.
Indeed. And for our listeners out there, thanks for joining us on this historical adventure. We hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more fascinating stories from the past and explorations of the present. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and maybe, just maybe, think twice before you shoot a pig.